Alright folks, it's happening. We are crossing the Rubicon, through the looking glass, into Narnia, and going somewhere that very few of us have gone in our synthesis journey. I'm talking, of course, about physical modeling synthesis. And physical modeling is a different type of synthesis than any of the other more common types of synthesis, like subtractive, wavetable, FM, granular, or additive synthesis. Physical modeling? Alright, I'm just gonna say it. It's weird. It's complex. And you know what? Here's maybe the craziest part to grasp. Inside a physical modeling synthesizer, even we don't know exactly what's happening, and we made it. That's because physical modeling synthesis models the physical world, and the physical world is weird. It's complex. So when it came time to design Objekt, we decided to represent all that chaos and complexity in a form factor most familiar to Reason users, as a synth. Which makes sense because, well, it is a synth. But Objekt works differently from any synth you've ever used. So today, let's get to understand what makes physical modeling work and how you can quickly and easily move around Objekt, customizing and perfecting sounds that are entirely unique to you. Objekt is capable of creating a wide variety of sounds in organic instruments, from majestic timpanis enchanting bells, acoustic bass, electric keys, and even otherworldly pads. And the way that Objekt can make this enormous variety of real-world acoustic sounds is that it makes them using the same acoustic concepts found in the real world. On a really fundamental level, all acoustic instruments are made up from things that resonate, or vibrate, and things that get those resonating things to resonate. Pick any instrument. A guitar, for example. The strings resonate, which travel down and transfer their resonating energy to the bridge, which then begins to resonate the wooden top, which then begins to resonate the back and sides and other parts of the guitar. But the strings don't resonate on their own. Something needs to get that going. On a guitar, that's usually a finger or a plastic pick, which excites the string to start vibrating. For a drum, the sonic result is entirely different, but the basic components are the same. We have a large resonating body which gets excited into its resonating state when struck in some way. Use something hard and dense like a wooden drumstick, and the resonance has a high, sharp end quality to it. Use something softer, like a felt mallet, and the exciter being soft gives the resonance a soft quality as well. Now looking at Objekt, the front panel will start to make sense when you realize that its main sections deal with the same two things, the resonating and the excitement of that resonation. Let's talk about those two sections as we explore the sounds that Objekt makes, starting with very basic sounds we get by resetting Objekt to its default state. At first, when we initialize to this basic patch, we've got something that sounds sort of like a string, sort of like a synth. So what's happening here? Well, remember the resonating bodies that make up acoustic instruments? Objekt has three different resonators, which we either call a modal resonator or one of two objects that resonate depending upon which style of physical modeling synthesis is being employed. We can activate or deactivate each resonator above its tab. So let's deactivate Objekt 1. And move over to the modal tab and activate it. Resonating frequencies on the modal tab are based on tuned resonating filters that produce tones not too unlike the sine wave operators we find on the algorithm FM synthesizer. So, if we reduce down to just one modal frequency and play a key on our keyboard, we'll hear a short but rather pure tone. If we wanted to increase the decay of the note, we could max out the decay scale and use the decay time knob to increase our note's length. Turning up release mute, unsurprisingly, allows us to mute the note's sustain when we release the key. Adding in another modal frequency, we can tune that frequency to the perfect overtone series, or start experimenting with the imperfection found in the real world when frequencies outside the overtone series resonate alongside a note's pitch. We can scale the decay for that overtone down so that it decays faster than our fundamental, and we could add another modal frequency that's even higher. And let's turn off the keyboard tracking after the second modal frequency so that whatever note I play on the keyboard, that third modal frequency will stay the same always. Now, we're still far off from any real convincing acoustic instrument, but already you can start to see how the qualities of something like a marimba is coming into focus, and how acoustic instruments can be represented in physical modeling by the way their frequencies resonate together. If we deactivate the modal tab and now activate the Objekt 1 layer, we might start to recognize certain similarities from the modal tab, but also some new stuff too. The Objekt 1 and Objekt 2 layers use a style of resonating that is based on a very fast feeding back delay. And if that sounds weird to you, allow me to demonstrate using an actual delay effect. If we had a little blip sound running through the echo and set it up in a pretty normal setting, it would sound just like a normal delay effect. But if we set the timing really fast and crank the feedback up to nearly 100%, well, now we've got a tone which rings out and decays. Kind of like a string, kind of like a synth. See where we're going here? The same basic thing is employed for Objekt 1's resonator frequencies. Listen again. Does this sound familiar? But just like the modal tab, we can tune and layer additional frequencies on top. So we could add another frequency at 3.0, and another at 9.0. And of course, the same fractional tuning is also possible for each frequency as well. But one other thing that we can also do with Objekt 1 that the modal tab can't do is turn on coupling. Coupling changes these frequencies from being independent resonating frequencies to instead feeding into each other so that one resonating frequency interacts with another resonating frequency, which is how objects in the real world actually work. Think about a crash cymbal for a second. When a stick strikes a cymbal, various parts of the metal start vibrating at different frequencies, and those vibrations all happen on the same sheet of metal, so they each interact with each other. It should therefore come as no surprise that when we turn coupling on, the result instantly starts to sound more metallic in nature. Okay, now believe it or not, all of that was a giant tangent. I mean, I want you to have some understanding of the resonators, but from here on out, I probably won't be messing with the resonator frequencies very much at all by way of manual adjustment. Because the truth is that Objekt is absolutely packed full of presets, where sound designers more clever than me have created amazing sounds by dialing in these resonator frequencies and making blended layers of sounds. Take this attached string patch, for example. You can see that Objekt 2 has a rather mathematically perfect set of overtone frequencies set up. But if we head over to Objekt 1, you'll see something far more nuanced. If I turn off Objekt 1 in the mixer, I'll just hear Objekt 2 resonating. And likewise, I can listen to only Objekt 1. Okay, so that makes sense. The perfect overtones give us the almost plastic Blue Man Group resonance, and Objekt 1 is set up to provide a short, sharp, percussive quality. Put them together, and we get this unique but sort of unidentifiable instrument that has acoustic qualities of a plastic resonator with strings on it being struck sort of like a hammered dulcimer. Now knowing what each layer is doing, we could adjust our mixer to, for example, accentuate that percussive sound. But before we go even deeper with these resonators, let's remember what I said at the top of the video. Resonators are only half the sound. In fact, actually, they're less than half the sound because on their own, a resonator doesn't make any sound at all. I mean, here, this is the sound of my guitar's resonator on its own. It's not until we get a resonator going with an exciter that it makes any sound at all. So let's turn our attention over to the exciter section. So what does a typical exciter actually sound like? Well, if we turn off Objekt 1 and 2 over on our mixer and turn up the exciter fader, we'll hear the sound of our exciter on its own. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it sounds kind of insignificant on its own, but anyone who's ever played guitar will recognize the sound of a pick on a fully muted string. Same idea. To learn more about the exciter section, let's make a new really basic patch from scratch so that all we have happening is an exciter exciting a resonator. I know I said that I wouldn't be messing with the resonator frequencies manually anymore in this video, but one handy feature of Objekt is a collection of template material types you can choose from. These are like frequency overtone recipes that instantly start us off with the sonic qualities of wood, metal, or even a flawless reproduction of the snare drum on Metallica's album Saint Anger.
Sad but true.
Let's choose one of the glass templates. And right out of the gate, we've got a pretty convincing sound of crystal glasses being tapped with a plastic mallet. If we turn the exciter level all the way down, what do you think will happen? If you said our resonator goes silent, well, you're correct. If we turn it all the way up, however, it doesn't just mean that our resonator gets louder. I mean, it does get louder, sure, but just like if we hit a crystal glass in the real world harder, turning up the exciter level changes the quality of the glass's ringing tone. And here, this is the whole ballgame. This is the benefit of physical modeling synthesis. When you do naturally expressive things, the instrument responds naturally. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been playing an object patch and I find myself connecting to it like a real instrument because it's giving me back what I'm putting into it, and I can lean into that and it responds. To make this glass more realistic, I can dial up the velocity control that feeds directly into the exciter level to take my incoming performance velocity and replicate how hard my exciter is striking the crystal glass. The rest of the impact controls help us further adjust the sound of our exciter, and thus the style and method for how we might be playing these crystal glasses. If I were to turn the frequency of our exciter up, we might move away from this plastic mallet type of sound to something more like when you tap silverware against a glass to give a wedding toast. If we turn the frequency down instead, and maybe dial the hardness of the exciter down to a lower setting, our mallets now have more of a felt-wrapped quality to them. Or we can bring up the frequency and hardness, but use the diffuse section to change the style of the exciter, from something that sounds like a mallet striking the crystal in a single crisp transient, to more of a rubbing or plucking type sound where the contact of the transient strike is sort of spread out and diffused for a special softened type of attack. I'll max out the time to make it obvious. Here's without diffusion, and here is with. In more subtle settings, it can just add a slight imperfection to the exciter in a way that adds realism. So that's the exciter impact section. There's two other ways we can excite our resonator bodies, but before we do that, let's load up another patch because there are so many good patches that come with Objekt, I'd hate to spend the whole video on a crystal glass. Check out this totally chill vibe I've made.
I saw the whole world down for you. If you want me to, for you, I'll make it all up to you.
And yes, all the instruments you're hearing, besides the vocal, are coming from Objekt.
For you.
No, that's right. The jazz brush drums and cymbals, the upright bass, the Rhodes electric keys, and this melodic top vibe called Mellow Yellow that comes from Objekt's Synth and Keys folder of presets. Right now, you can see how the Mellow Yellow preset uses all three resonators, which are being excited by that little impact exciter we've been tapping our crystal glasses with. But if I were to turn the impact exciter level all the way down, we can still hear a sort of haunting decay tail from our sound. So what is that? Is it something technical, like a pre-fader reverb send tail coming back to us? No. It's coming from the second section of the exciter noise section. We don't only have to excite our resonators using a short click sound. We could use noise, which is exactly what's happening here. If we change this to a more traditional white noise, you'll hear our resonators reacting to the fuller frequency spectrum that white noise provides. If we wanted to design our exciter sound by hand, we could turn off the resonators in our mixer, bring up the exciter fader, and now we could go about dialing in certain controls, like let's minimize the delay between pressing the key and getting our noise. And let's shorten the decay and sustain so that we have a sharper noise burst rather than the aftertail our preset originally had. Turn back on our resonators and turn down the exciter fader, and you'll hear our instrument is less mellow and has a sharper attack. By experimenting with the exciter noise, you can really create different vibes. Like, what does our instrument sound like if excited by static? Or how about the random pulse? I can slow the rate of these noise generators down as well. And by adjusting things like the attack time, this instrument gets more textural and atmospheric than melodic like it once was. And of course, you can combine noise exciters with impact exciters to create different effects and textures. While that combination of impact exciters and noise exciters is particularly useful for pads and evolving sounds, one of my favorite presets in the factory sound bank for Objekt is called Prepared Piano. Because it starts out getting a pretty decent rendition of a piano, but then goes about messing it up exactly the way a modern classical composer might do when they create things called prepared pianos, which means modifying the piano in weird ways, like sticking forks and screws and even dry ice inside a piano to make it buzz and rattle unnaturally. Prepared Piano has a lovely detuned sound and a random rattle or buzz courtesy of Objekt's static exciter. I don't know, I just love all those little gremlins in the piano, and they're different every time, too. This type of sound gives me instant ideas about a fairly emo kind of instrumental. I'll bring in an orchestral type of bass drum, a little synth bass pulse, and then, if I play the French horn preset from Objekt in its higher range, I end up with a rather nice soprano-style saxophone whose note dynamics and phrasing I can shape with the mod wheel. Below the exciter noise section, there's this little unassuming section that's up to you to explore and try out. But if you got interested in the idea of static, noise, and pulses acting as the exciter, then you'll love the idea of routing any audio into Objekt on the backside to serve as an exciter. That could mean anything, from your own custom noise and static creations from Thor, for example, or it could be a sample like this bucket drum loop. Now that we've mastered the exciter section and its relationship to the resonators, let's head back over to the resonator section to check out the last big unknowns on Objekt's front panel. And those are the controls which handle the behavior of the resonators and the style of resonating. Those overtone frequencies we were previously tuning are only one piece of the way an acoustic body might resonate. And like I said earlier, I'm not one to spend much of my time manually tweaking those frequencies. But one place I definitely do spend time tweaking and having fun is the section below the resonator frequencies. In fact, adjusting the so-called CPDDD section, as Adam Dorn coined it,
instead of ADSR, I'm CPDDD.
I can take presets already in the Objekt Factory sound bank to entirely new places. Here, we've got a koto preset, which sounds as it should, like a nice plucked string. If we check out the layers in our mixer, the modal resonator is doing some transient attack work. Objekt 1 is the ringing part of the note. And Objekt 2 is some more realism sound design. So let's focus on Objekt 1, starting with the damping controls. Damping is a type of filter that lets us control how long and prominently certain frequency bands from a resonator ring out. And although it looks like a 3-band EQ, these are not low, mid, and high frequency boost or cut controls. Let me try and visualize it for you. The low damp control is a frequency sweep, which starts off not dampening the low resonance at all, and then moving in and damping it off as we turn up. Similarly, but in the opposite direction, the high control damps and chokes off the resonance of the high frequencies from its left position, and sweeping the range of the knob moves the damping frequencies away, revealing higher buzzy overtones in the upper range. And here, the slope control is not unlike the slope found on an analog filter. The mid-frequency controls behave differently. Here we can choose a frequency using the mid knob, like 440 Hz, and then use the gain knob below to dampen our mid frequencies and either accentuate the chosen frequency to ring out, or to notch itself out even faster for a hollow metallic effect. To the right of our damping controls, we have more global decay controls for this resonator that behave as you'd expect. But over on the left, we've got some other controls that are unique to physical modeling, so let's discuss them. Collision simulates the often physical limitations of any vibrating object. It's maybe most easy to think about a string in this case. But if it vibrates strong enough, eventually a string will often collide with the instrument it's attached to, like the fretboard of a guitar. And when that happens, the louder dynamic playing is met with a choking off of the sound, like this. And sometimes a string might even bounce against that surface. But keep in mind, this doesn't only apply to strings. It's the same concept that makes snares rattle underneath a snare drum. Pitch mod is another real-world emulation. Anybody who's maybe plucked a string too hard or played an instrument like a zither where this is very easy to do will know the sound of pitch mod. A high performance velocity plucks our virtual string so hard that it actually pulls it sharp at first and then returns to its correct resonating pitch. And yeah, while too much pitch mod will make your instrument sound like a bow and arrow firing off, a more subtle setting can go a long way to sounding like a real-world instrument that is responding to the player's dynamics. Well, this just leaves dispersion. Dispersion is a weird one, but we've all heard it before. When someone bangs on a steel cable, when someone skates on cracking ice. That's dispersion in the real world. Dispersion is when the frequencies, as they've been defined above in our resonator, travel through our virtual instrument's material at different speeds, causing the low frequencies to shift lower, the high frequency overtones to move higher, and for everything to just, disperse. The sonic result is something like a metallic, hollow detuning effect that can even change the tuning of our keyboard. Adjusting the mod and filter controls will further tweak the behavior of the dispersion, but be aware, these controls can cause the sound to actually feed back internally and run away from you. But, just dialing back the controls get things back in line. But who knows, maybe you'll surprise us by going in and making a landmark album by riding those dispersive feedback controls to create whale song. Okay, now that we've gone through nearly every knob on Objekt one by one, I want to show you my favorite way to never touch them again. Well, okay, I'm kidding, but I want to show you the Randomizer, because that little corner of Objekt is a super powerful sound design tool. Let's load another patch. Kalimba from the Bells and Mallets folder is a nice metallic but melodic instrument. if I like the general style of the sound, but I'd like to explore variations on it, there is no better tool on Objekt for doing just that than the Randomizer. It's pretty straightforward. I select which layers I want to randomize, I click Randomize, and my settings are randomized. Every time I click, I get a new randomized sound. However, I'm not stuck simply rolling the dice each time. Using the percentage slider, I can actually morph between my original and the new randomized sound and determine where I'd like my actual sound to fall on that morphed spectrum. 0% and sounding like my original. 100% totally overtaken by my randomized settings. Or in between, where characteristics of each sound are still present. If I never find a sound I like more than my starting point, I can cancel out of the randomizer. Or if I do find a sound I like, I can click OK to commit those settings to Objekt. When used to a subtle degree, the randomizer can take acoustic instruments like this kalimba and tweak it just enough to be your own personal kalimba. Or a bit more until it's a new acoustic instrument that sounds real but unidentifiable. I've got a confession to make. Remember back when I demonstrated how hard mallets and soft mallets sound in the real world on an Irish drum? Use something softer, like a felt mallet, and the exciter being soft gives the resonance a soft quality as well. Well, it's time I come clean. The sound you were hearing was actually coming from Objekt. To create the Irish drum, I just loaded up the timpani preset. I clicked the randomizer a few times, and I landed here. A totally convincing sounding bowran. This is probably a good time to mention something to be aware of. You might notice that while experimenting with the randomizer, and this is also true if you're manually adjusting resonator overtones, turning on coupling, or even getting bold with dispersion, you might find that the tuning of your instrument shifts from the A440 tuned instruments we all know and use. If that's the case, like it is here for my modified kalimba, all I need to do is to click the Analyze button for Objekt to determine the tuning offset, and then click Fix to calibrate my keyboard back in tune with all my other instruments. Alright folks, that was a lot of information to go through and a whole new style of synthesis to learn with its own terminology too. So if you made it this far into the deep dive, congratulate yourself. I hope I've helped make this new synth not feel so foreign and abstract. In fact, if I've done my job, you'll feel ready to dive in and make your own sounds. Whether that's using resonator templates, putting the randomizer to use, exploring the exciters, or modifying the damping, collision, and other behaviors of each resonator layer until you end up with a sound that's entirely realistic, entirely otherworldly, and most importantly, entirely your own. Thanks for watching, and we'll have more to show you about Objekt. Because believe it or not, there is deeper to dive than this deep dive dove.